Welcome to another webinar from the TUC. Happy Heart Unions Week. This is the week in the year where we think about all the ways that unions are great and how they help people every day, year in, year out. But we particularly like to think about it this year and all the ways that we love our union. Now, today's webinar is about bargaining for better pay, and maybe you can see on my little badge, want a pay rise, join a union. That's the theme of this year's Heart Unions Week, and we'll be posting some links to information about Heart Unions Week so you can find out a bit more if you like. As always, we've got live captions on this webinar. The green button underneath this video will open those for you. We are also really pleased to see so many of you already introducing yourself in the chat panel. Please tell us any tips you've got about bargaining for pay, or whether you've any experience you've got about this. We welcome any questions as well for Lewis after I've asked him some questions first. So please do post your questions in the Q&A panel, which looks like a speech bubble with a question mark in it. We are, of course, recording today's webinar, and we will send everybody a link to the recording along with any resources that we might talk about during today's session. A little bit unusually, we've also got some questions for you today. So you'll see on the right-hand side, there's a little icon that looks like a graph. That's where our polls will appear. The first poll will be opened now. Please take a look and vote in the poll because we're really keen to hear about your experiences in the workplace. We will be making more poll questions available throughout the webinar. So we've got 2 or 3 coming up, so just keep an eye on that as well. Okay, I'm delighted to be joined by Lewis Emery from the Labour Research Department. And as I said, we're going to be talking about pay bargaining today. But first of all, I'm just going to get Lewis to introduce himself for us before we get going.
Hi there. Yes, very pleased to be invited once again to the TUC webinar. And I'm delighted in Heart Trade Unions Week, to be able to contribute because unions play such a huge role and have been really, really active, haven't they, in the last couple of years. So I'm very glad to be here, and hopefully, we can have a great discussion about pay bargaining.
Yep, I'm sure we will. So first question for you, Lewis. What do we mean by bargaining for pay? Let's take this right back to, the beginning.
Right, indeed. Okay. Well, it's a very good question because firstly, we have, if you like, different levels at which trade unions can help. Obviously, we have a minority of workers, unfortunately, who are in trade unions. I have some stats available on that if you want them. But it's interesting that probably almost twice as many people who belong to a union say there is a union in my workplace, which they, for some reason, haven't joined. So for collective bargaining, really we are looking firstly at getting the employer to recognise the trade union, to recognise that there's a trade union that speaks on behalf of the workforce, or at least a group of the workforce, because that's, if you like, the starting gate for collective bargaining. There are some employers who will do that, some quite big employers who will do that, but will say, no, decisions over pay are ours to take. And it's a sad fact that across the, where we are, most workplaces, probably it's actually the employer who just simply decides this is what the pay is going to be. Unilateral, I suppose it's probably true in smaller workplaces, but the employer just unilaterally saying this is the pay level, take it or leave it. Well, collective bargaining is it's the complete opposite of that. It's where we get to sit at the table as union members and representatives and say we have a view. We have a view on our terms and conditions of employment, and you're going to listen to that view, and we're going to negotiate, and we're going to come out at the end of the day with an agreement. Obviously, we're trying to persuade the employer to do what we want them to do. We know, of course, ultimately, if we're well organised, if we've got good reps and solid members, then there is the option of industrial action. But I suppose most of the time, it's a negotiation that takes place and a negotiated outcome.
That's really interesting, Lewis. And you've talked there about negotiating around pay. Is there a difference between collective and individual bargaining for pay?
Yes, indeed. In fact, preparing for this event today, I thought to myself, well, you quite often see these articles in magazines or online, how to negotiate your pay rise, and it's usually a sort of a plucky individual such as myself or yourself sitting on the other side of the table with an employer, and typically trying to persuade, especially speaking confidently and graciously, that to get a pay rise. And it's interesting to see what these articles say. I can just quickly run through some of them because I've read several. Choose a good time, they say. Do some research online and have a pay range in mind. Bring other evidence that can boost your case. Be knowledgeable about the employer's position. Emphasize your own strengths and contributions. And have an eye to other possible benefits, that you might want. The trouble with all of that is it's all very individual. It's me. I'm special. Please give me a leg up here. And what trade unions can bring to this situation, which is completely missing really from most of these accounts, is that collective mind, if you like, collective intelligence about what's going on in this workplace. How is it that so-and-so's paid that much and so-and-so's paid that much? How long have they been here? What job are they doing? What's the relative pay rates between them? Did their pay go up last year? Didn't it go up last year? Are we going to get a pay rise every year, etc.? So what trade unions do is they bring a regularity, they bring an organization and a discipline to that process, so that it's no longer the employer just saying, I feel like giving so-and-so a pay rise this year. They've been working hard and they're loyal people. We reverse the table. We say, actually, it's time for our pay rise. Do you know it's coming up in 2 months' time? We haven't even arranged a meeting yet to discuss it. So that's the collective approach. We approach the employer as an equal in that relationship collectively. We can't do it individually, perhaps we can do it collectively.
That's a really interesting way of putting it, I think. It's approaching the employer on an equal footing rather than with the power dynamic that there might be in that individual situation. Okay, so we want to think a little bit now about what do we know about trade union bargaining for pay? Obviously, Lewis is from the Labour Research Department, who collect all this information, as in the name, do a lot of research about it as well. So what do we know about trade unions' involvement?
Okay, so I mean, just in terms of the proportion of workers, perhaps I can give you a statistic to bring this along. So 39% of workers, employees, are covered by some sort of collective agreement. That's unfortunately lower in the private sector, 20%, 1 in 5, but in the public sector, it's nearly 9 out of 10. So what that means is there are a vast array of collective agreements out there. They are more concentrated in the public sector. It didn't used to be the case, and obviously we'd like to wind that back and get to a situation. And it's very encouraging to see people like the Uber Eats people and the Deliveroo people out there just doing it, and congratulations to them. So what we mean by collective bargaining in that situation, collective agreements, is first of all we'll have a framework for bargaining. Almost the very first thing unions are going to do is set out how are we going to negotiate, when are we going to negotiate, who are we going to negotiate with, recognition of our representatives, shop stewards, and so on. Once we've got that, then there'll be a meeting at some level. Now, I'm interested in your polling questions here, Anna, because I'm well aware that there may be people at the meeting here who have never bargained before, who've never been in a collective agreement before, who may be working in a small workplace, one site, maybe an individual bus garage, maybe, or an individual workshop, or an individual charity office. But equally, there are groupings of collective agreements, if you like, that come together. So let's take local government workers. Local government workers in England and Wales and Northern Ireland belong to one of the biggest collective agreements there is. Well over 1 million workers covered by one set of negotiations. It doesn't mean to say every single thing happens at national level, because obviously, in local government, a lot is decided, pay structures and so on, at local authority level. So when you're bargaining, in that situation, one of the first things you've got to decide is, what are my constraints here? Am I a free agent here? Can I just go in and within union policy, can I negotiate what I like? Or is there a wider framework that I need to refer back to? Are there people negotiating on my behalf? And if so, what input can I have?
Well, that leads nicely into our next poll of the audience, where we're going to ask you, you should just be able to see it now, do you take part in pay bargaining? As Lewis said, he's very interested in hearing about that as well. And like he said, if you're public sector, it's likely, or not likely, but more likely maybe, that you are less involved because it might be done at a national level. So we're really interested to collect the votes. I can see the votes coming in now, so we'll just let that run for a little bit. Okay, so the past 18 months or so has seen a big rise in industrial action from across many, many different sectors, largely about pay. So what do we know about that? Has it been successful? Has it worked? Have you got information that you can share with us on that, please?
I mean, we report industrial disputes in our magazine's Workplace Report and Labour Research, and we take a great interest in them, both in the process of the disputes and the outcomes. In terms of the strikes and actions that have been taking place, I mean, they have been hugely successful, and I don't think you can't miss the fact that time and again union members have gone out and they've taken action. It's not always necessarily a strike; it might be action short of strike, and they have achieved. I mean, I can think of a group in the air transport sector who never had a strike ballot before until last year, and they were an organised group. And what we've seen happening is pay deals that have been going up and up. They're starting to tail off now, and in fact, if you able to have a look at the Labour Research Department website after this is all over and done with, in our pay and bargaining news section, we publish every month a kind of running tally of the pay deals that have been done. So I can tell you that sort of pay deals were mounting up. Just if I may introduce a little bit of technical stuff here, how do we measure a pay deal? And the figure that we use is the median, which is it's not quite the same as an average. It's if you stretch the workforce out and pick somebody in the middle, what pay rise did they get? And that would be the median rise, and that's the figure that we track, because if you go for an average, that can be distorted by a few people who've got, say, a really big rise. So sorry to throw that jargon in. It's just a way of measuring what's the middle ground in a range of factors. And if we look back over the last 12 months or so, we had the middle level of pay deals coming in at the start of the year at around about 7 or possibly 7 or 8%. Now, for somebody who's been following these trends for far too long, I remember years when it was nothing ever more than 3%, 3%, and so on. This last period has been absolutely unprecedented in my experience. And it's not just reflected in the pay deals, it's also reflected in government statistics on average weekly earnings. Now, I can go on to talk about inflation later on, but here's the fly in the ointment. We've been up against, and perhaps to some extent driven by, again, in recent history, unprecedented levels of price inflation. They haven't quite gone in sequence. And we have a situation now where average earnings and pay are growing faster than the rate of inflation. There's a whole, discussion to be had about that. And it's a good thing to see, but it's been a while in coming.
Thanks, Lewis. And I'm just going to give a little recap for you and for the audience of the poll. We asked you if you took part in paid bargaining, and so far 72.9% of people are saying yes, they have, and 27.1% saying no. So I think that will keep shifting a little bit over the webinar as more people vote. But I'll be honest, I am surprised. I thought it would be a bit more even. It's great to see that so many attendees, workplace reps or officers are involved in pay. So we've set the scene a little bit with some of the background here around pay bargaining, and now I'm going to move on to some of the more of the detail of how it's done. So next question: what do we mean by a pay claim? What does a pay claim include?
Okay, so really speaking, you've got pretty much a free hand really with a pay claim. But I mean, I suppose what people are usually looking to do in a pay claim is, firstly, where am I starting from? And having a good sense of where you're starting from and where your members are at, I think is really important. I mean, if you're in a well-organized collective bargaining scenario where all of the previous agreements are kind of, are there to be seen and there to be referred to, that's wonderful. It may be a bit more sketchy than that, and a bit more ad hoc. So knowing where you're starting from is going to be very, very important. But also, what's your context? So, for example, you may be in a workplace where everyone's on the national minimum wage or the national living wage, and that is a fact of life. You may be in a workplace where the minimum rate of pay is the real living wage recommended by the Living Wage Foundation, and there's that's a very interesting development, and there are lots and lots of employers now who follow that. So that, if you like, leads to the idea of, well, what is the minimum wage level in a given workplace? And quite often getting up above the statutory minimum or above the voluntary minimum is an objective. But clearly speaking, most people are paid at a higher level than that. So what we want to do, obviously, with a pay claim, is to ensure that we at least, I would say that we at least match the rate of inflation, so that at the end of the day, they've still got the same spending power that they had before. Ideally, we want to improve that. So unions will be looking, particularly if there's productivity, if there are fewer people doing more work, which is a fact of life, then we should be seeing that reflected in an inflation plus settlement. So that is, if you like, where we launch it from. But what's our pay structure like? That would be my first question. Okay, so have you only got one rate of pay? Have you got multiple rates of pay? Because if you've got multiple rates of pay, you've got a whole grading system. Then there are relativities between those grades that have been argued over, presumably, and discussed at some point. And also there are, the word differentials. It used to be a difficult word, differentials, but I'd like to turn that around actually and say there's pay progression, because if I've been in a job for a couple of years, I want to feel not only am I being compensated for the increase in my cost of living, but I'm being recognised for the experience and for the skills I've acquired and the training I've acquired while I've been doing that job. So your pay claim is very much going to be structured around where are you starting, what grade rates would you like? Now, in a national setting like local government or Agenda for Change in the health service, the rates of pay are all arranged on a spine, and people who are familiar with this will know that it's then open to, so the negotiators at national level, particularly in local government is a good example, will say, okay, the spine points have all increased by, let's say, 5 or 10%. And by the way, we've knocked out a couple of the lower ones because they were just too low. And it will then be for people at local authority level to say, okay, well, we can feed that into the grading structure we've already got. Just to say a little bit more about the pay claim. Pay, of course, needn't be the be-all and end-all, but just to focus on a couple of things with pay. Supposing you're working shifts, you want your shift premiums to be as valuable to you the day after the pay deal as they were the day before. So you have to make sure that in the course of securing a wage increase, those shift rates increase too. The same applies also to your premium payments. Supposing the employer has decided to pay you 50% premium for working on a Saturday, and that works out at, £18 an hour, let's say, for sake of, £18 an hour. After the pay deal, you don't want to just still be earning £18 an hour on a Saturday. So tying in those, I tend to call them these pay additions. They're part of the pay structure or the pay superstructure, and they're really important, actually. People care about these pay additions. So those are your additions to your basic rates of pay. The basic rates of pay are usually used to calculate the other elements in your pay package. But then what about your progression? Because quite a lot of organizations, the rate of pay that you start on is not really the rate of pay for the job. It's the rate of pay for the job actually is a rate you might achieve after 4 or 5 years. Now, politicians, without naming any parties, tend to say, "Oh, this is icing on the cake." This is. Do you know they get 2 pay rises every year? Do you know that? And the truth of the matter is that the rate of pay is the top of the scale, and therefore you need to know also that not only are you getting a cost of living pay rise, you're also progressing towards what's the agreed level that your pay should be. And that's very important. And the mechanism by which you progress, the fairness of it, the equalities, the risks of discrimination in any structure. These are all the other things that begin to come into play in putting together a pay claim. It really pays to stop and think, especially if you think outside the box a bit. What haven't we done recently? What haven't we tried? Is there a little bit of an extra benefit at the end of the day? And I don't want to say this, but supposing we've pushed the employer about as far as we think we can get them. Is there a little bit more that we can get out of them? Could we get I don't know, a half and half the working week maybe, or could we get an extra couple of weeks paternity leave? So you can go on with a pay claim. I suppose the risk is, and I'll stop here, Anna. You put too much in at one go, and you lose the focus, and you get the cheap things and not the expensive things.
I think there's some really excellent points there, about what to consider above and beyond the initial salary pay, I guess, that core thing. And I think it will depend on the workplace, and actually, again, what your members want, on what you put in and when. We all know that a key part of being a rep is talking to your members, and you are obviously representing what they want and what they ask for. So I think many workplaces might do a pay survey. They might, depending on the size of it, they might talk to members one-to-one or in a group. Obviously, with a huge workplace, it's easier to do on a survey because we've all got limited time. But yeah, find out what your members want, what's important to them. Maybe get them to rank their wants, their top 3 or their top 5 or something. So Lewis, you mentioned a little bit there about equalities. I wanted to delve into that a little bit more. What are some of the equality considerations around pay that reps should be aware of when negotiating?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we're lucky that we have in Britain we have the Equalities Act 2010, which lays down a series of protected characteristics, and in Northern Ireland there is I think pre-existing legislation largely that covers similar ground. Obviously, what we want to do is make sure that any negotiations that take place, any pay arrangements that are entered into, are fair and equal for everyone within the sense that equal work for equal pay for work of equal value. That principle of avoiding unjustified discrimination. And by the way, we see how much of a mess employers get into when they don't pay attention to this kind of thing. We've seen time and again. We've seen. I think it's Birmingham, one of the big local authorities, just getting it wrong. So on the equality side, clearly there are some potential danger signals, I think, in any pay system for equalities, and those would be where basically the employer, going back to our starting point, where the employer has too much of a say on picking and choosing. You get a pay rise, or you get an extra grand or a couple of grand, and you don't. And on what basis? What characteristics is the employer bringing into play there? Now, I think there's. I'm quite keen on. I think one of the things I would urge. I'm sure 3/4 of you are negotiators already, so I'm sure you know all this stuff better than I do anyway. But I would say that there are certain sort of external factors coming into play with a pay system. We talked about the minimum wage, and we talked about the real living wage, and I think it's important, therefore, that we also take account of other statutory resources, let's say, that we can take into account. So, I mean, first of all, just talking about the Equalities Act, and you mentioned a member survey, Anna, and I think this is a really important thing. And it's something, by the way, that I think new reps or new activists can get involved in helping with this process of mapping their workplace. It's a really good way of engaging. I mean, you don't have to go and eyeball to eyeball with the employer to help with some mapping exercises and talking to people and spreading the word. And so, and likewise for any session negotiators, you do need to know that other people have got your back. You're not just out there on your own. But thinking about equality, I think basically one of the things I'd like to flag up here is the gender pay gap reporting system. Now, I imagine there will be people out there rolling their eyes about this because it's something which has been on the trade union wish list for a long time, but as executed, all but the smallest employers have to submit information about their pay systems and their levels of pay and bonus payments. Now, it's a bit of information there. It's worth looking at, and it can be quite revealing. It may reveal that you've got a very segregated workforce in many different ways. And of course, there's ethnicity pay gap reporting coming along as well. It may be difficult to interpret perhaps as to what's going on. And if the employer just gives the statutory information, it can be hard to work out what's going on. But quite often employers will submit a report explaining why there's a pay gap or apologising for it and insisting that they've got very good networks and all the rest of it. There's all that stuff there. My personal approach to this kind of stuff is gather all the information you can that the other side is willing to make available. Every drop of information you can get, whether it's from their accounts or from their pay gap report or from their website, from their vacancies, or indeed other people say about their vacancies. There are lots of jobs websites out there. Gather every bit of information. But on the equality side, I think the nice thing about pay gap reporting is it also you can go to the employer and say, I don't really understand these figures in this pay gap report you've submitted. Can you explain them to me? And that's another way of getting information out. I mean, at the end of the day, the objective, obviously, isn't it, is to create a pay system and a pay structure which does not discriminate and which is fair. But that has to be worked out. We can't just assume. I mean, the old thing with job segregation. I mean, we do know that this is a big factor in the gender pay gap, for example. And by the way, that carries over into pensions too. So again, I think coming back and looking at your workforce before you even get into the negotiating room, where are the problems lie? What's sticking out like a sore thumb here? Something's not right. That department, that group of workers, and are they? And if the employer is not willing to, or apparently not aware that there's a disparity going on, going to them with that kind of information. We've surveyed the workforce. We've realised that there's a whole department here, and by the way, it's a majorly it's a department where the majority of the workforce are women. They're just that department is not seeing the level of pay progression that we're seeing in other parts of the organisation. And in fact, you can get some of these stats out of the employers themselves by using disclosure of information provisions that are available to you under employment law.
Thanks, Lewis. That's really helpful, especially about how you get information from the employer. I just want to pick up on something that a viewer posted in the chat a few minutes back. They asked about, so that they're having problems making a case about pay rates for roles in their organisation and how their organisation measures up against similar roles elsewhere. I think that's the question. So where can people find out information about other, comparative roles? Is this something that LRD holds info on, or is there another source of information for that?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Anna. I mean, this is where really, so far I think I've primarily talked about gathering information from within your own workplace, but clearly there's a whole labour market out there, and you want to make sure that you're getting a fair crack of the whip vis-a-vis other workplaces. There's no system really in this country that requires, there are some countries in Europe that actually require employers to register their collective agreements, and this kind of thing is actually much more organised. In the UK, it's generally been a sort of a voluntary effort to collect that kind of information. We do it at Labour Research Department. Please do have a look, by the way, at our website after this, where there's an explaining video about how we do this. But we collect information about pay deals, and we always say to people, please don't just tell us your pay deal, please tell us your rates of pay and the jobs that they cover. Because if we have that information, it's very powerful. I think sometimes people are a bit scared of giving us that information, and you shouldn't be, but it would be great if there was a more of a legal, clearly cut. I can share my information about pay with no detriment, and I'm going to go out and do it. And so I really would encourage people, if you can send information in like that to us here at LRD, we will put it on our Payline database. But we're not by no means the only source for that. There are a couple of other organisations that do very much the same sort of thing, and then there are government surveys. Now, the biggest government survey that I'm aware of is called the Annual Survey of Hours and Earnings, ASHE, A-S-H-E, and it really is the biggest survey of its kind in the country. And what ASHE provides is information about the rates of pay that people get, the hours of work they do, the job they do, the industry they're in, their gender, and whether they're full-time, part-time. And it's a very useful source of information. Sadly, the Office for National Statistics just don't make it very easy to access. So I would say to affiliated unions, to unions affiliated to the Labour Research Department, if this is something you want help with, let us know, because it is perfectly accessible, but it's a bit opaque, to be honest. But if I could give you, just a little example, Anna, of how the ASHE information can work. So I was looking at these figures yesterday, and this is information collected in April 2023. Employers get a little email or used to be a letter through the post. I understand you employ, such and such a person with such and such a national insurance number. You must tell us what they're paid, how many hours they work, and so on. It's actually a statutory thing if you get one of these letters. So it's powerful. And so, for example, I can tell you from the latest survey that the median level of gross full-time weekly pay, so that's the middle of the range across all employees, was £681.70. Okay, so far so good. But then, my employer doesn't employ all employees. We're a certain kind of employee here. So, and you can narrow it down. And so, for example, I can tell you that for skilled metal, electrical, and electronic trades workers, to pick one example, skilled metal, electrical, and electronic trades, the median gross weekly full-time weekly pay is actually surprisingly similar. It's £680.10. So you almost completely marry up there with the workforce. But I think what's really interesting here, Anna, and this is an example of something that ASHE can do for you. They chop the workforce up into tenths. And so I can tell you that although the median gross weekly pay for a skilled metal, electrical, and electronic worker is £680.10, a tenth of them doing a full-time job are only earning £467. On the other hand, a tenth of them are earning £1,036.50 a week. Now, there are intermediate positions. Now, that can what I like about that, and it does go down to a much more granular level than that. Although if you push it too far, it kind of doesn't. They withhold the statistics because they're not solid. But you can actually say, well, hang on a minute. My members here are skilled electrical, metal electrical trades workers, and not only are we not on £680 a week or even 1,036, we're on 550, and that puts us in the lower quarter of workers. That puts us in the lower quarter. So that is, I think, an example of the way in which you can access publicly available benchmarking type data. You can also get it, as I say, from LRD, or you can approach LRD if we haven't got that information, that we will try to help you find it. But if you send in your rates of pay, we certainly do put those on the Payline database, and they're there to be seen. If I may say one other thing about benchmarking, Anna. Some employers do this too. In fact, one of the reasons LRD has a payline database is because unions said to us many years ago, actually, we'd like the same as the employers have, and so we have this database for you. One of the things that we know through that, as I say, is the sort of the pay rates that come and the structures within which those pay rates go. Now, employers on the other side, they do the same thing, and I mean they will have their pay clubs, or they'll go to a big HR or a big marketing type company who gather this information in, and they will say, okay, here's the rate of pay that is appropriate to your company. And if anyone here is in the finance sector, wave your hands, because I'm very sure you'll be familiar with this. The employer will turn around and say, okay, well, we're going to pay you such and such an increase this year, but by the way, the salary levels for this group of workers in our workforce are really actually a bit on the high side already. So that kind of benchmarking can be used against unions to say, actually, your requests are too ambitious. You can't expect us to go that far, etc., etc. So these kind of comparisons are really they're a live wire, and it's important for you. It's very important for you to get. By the way, incidentally, vacancies are another good source of information. There's a lot more information out there now online. I won't name the companies involved, but I'm sure you know who they are if you've ever Googled for a job doing this, that, or the other. But they're great, but what they don't tell you is the backstory. And this is where actually takes us right back to the beginning, because at the end of the day, there is a backstory to every trade union negotiated pay deal. It's about the history, it's about the structure, it's about the principles, it's about the equality and fairness. And that's what you don't get without a trade union. So there's lots of information available. If any of you have any more questions about that, please do, feel free to email us, and we'll try and point in the right direction.
Thanks, Lewis. And I think colleagues at the LRD posted how to contact you a bit far higher up in the chat. If you missed it, please don't worry. We'll make sure that's included in the email that goes out to everybody. There you go, pay@lrd.org.uk. Nice and easy. I just want, before I ask Lewis the final question from me, I want to just point out or ask for the audience's help. One of the viewers, a rep, has asked for tips on how to map in a very large workplace that has multi sites and limited access to each site. So I'm going to put that question over to you. If you've got experience of doing that, please post in the chat. I'm sorry, I can't remember the viewer's name. It was a few minutes ago, so it's disappeared now. But I think that's a really good piece of advice that they've asked for in how do you do that when you've got very many buildings that you don't always have access to. Because mapping, as we know, is so key to so much of what reps do. It's a really important step in the process. Sorry, Lewis, go on.
Thank you. No, thank you. I mean, because you're asking me not as I'm not I'm not a workplace rep in the sense that there are people are joining this meeting as a rep, but I have been certainly in the past, and I think that question very much depends on your circumstances. If you are, we have done sort of mapping. We've done member surveys for unions. We've done it a number of times actually over the years on different things, where a union would say distribute to their members, say via email or possibly now in some other format, a series of questions which we and they have worked on together, to which they want answers. And they may be sort of demographic type stuff. They may be to do with the facts that play a role in pay setting, and that you can imagine that might go out then to shop stewards, to individual members, what have you. But I can see that this is going to be difficult in a situation where people are not working at desks there and there, which after all, let's face it, it's most of us, isn't it? Where people are not necessarily having free reign. You're talking about what's the employer's attitude to this, first of all? Is the employer prepared to help you? I'd be tempted to think. I mean, you may have. There's two things about this. You may want to do this mapping behind the scenes, so that you can surprise them with some fantastic information, or you may be upfront about it and say, okay, we're looking to find this out. And by the way, the reason we're looking to find this out is because we're worried about X, Y, or Z. I mean, there may be something to be said about that, because you're already alerting them that you think there's a problem area. If you're in a situation where the employer is hostile to trade unions, this can be really difficult, and a bit like organising any kind of membership drive. You're probably going to have to be talking to people. You might have to do it. You might even have to call it people. Members might invite you to their homes, for example, to talk about stuff. I mean, I'm thinking back. Sometimes that stuff happens, doesn't it? Workplace is not conducive. But if you can get around a workplace, I suppose if it's a situation where there's a lot of non-union members, and you're trying to engage them with a union pay campaign, that's really akin to an organising drive, isn't it? And the techniques that unions teach reps to help with organisation, that they would be employed. I mean, there may be an issue of people feeling that they don't want to tell you, they don't want to be seen to tell you. There's this whole secrecy thing, which is so corrosive. And unfortunately, I'm sure goes on in too many workplaces. That it may come down to talking to people one-to-one individually. If you're in a position of being able to circulate some sort of a survey, there are survey software is readily available these days. You can do polls on WhatsApp. You can use serving. I won't say the proprietary brands, but there are lots of these days. There are so many different software options available. You do need to think then about security a little bit, because what you don't want to do is inadvertently gather information that could be identified or used against somebody. You've got to think about the general data protection regulations. You've got to think about those. They certainly have. They've added protection. But so if you're thinking about doing a union survey and you're not at all sure if you're going to be asking for any personal information, then I would definitely recommend that you talk to your union about if there are data protection issues that you need to take account of. If you're just doing an anonymous survey, so people aren't telling you who they are, what they do, obviously you've then got to have some confidence that the information you're being given isn't being, weighted by people with a particular issue. So it's a really good question, and maybe it's something we should expand on. And maybe what I would do at Labour Research Department, I'd send an email out to reps and workplace contacts, and I'd say, have you ever done a workplace survey? What did you do? You know what I mean? But we do get involved in them on our side if unions ask us to. And clearly, if you've got again, it might even be how good are our membership records in Union X or Union Y, because if you're doing something electronically, you're almost certainly going to need an email address, or possibly a mobile phone number, probably an email address. Who's got those email addresses anyway? So whether work, and it's a really really interesting question, and I think it's definitely deserves mulling over. And looking at your circumstances, considering the security aspect, looking to see what your union can do to help. And also, don't forget, your employer may already have collected all this information. So, for example, supposing you've got a performance-rated pay system and you've got, each grade has got 5 increments, and you want to know in each grade what proportion of people are on the top of their incremental scale, and you want to know their gender. Probably the employer's already done that, because if they're anything other than a small employer, they've got to have thought about their gender pay gap report. I don't know if
That's
that
really sage advice. I think that's really helpful. Thank you, Lewis. Really sage ideas there. And I think in the chat panel, some other audience members have also been offering tips to the original poster to see, hopefully there's some ideas there. But I am going to note that down as maybe something we can come back to at a future webinar, mapping across multi-employer sites. So leave that one with me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we've talked so far about the background to pay and what goes into a pay claim, but we then get to the pure negotiating at the table live rather than the submission. So have you got any tips or ideas around what might be good techniques for that stage of negotiation, please?
Right, okay. I would say, I mean, because I'm not present at, hardly ever present at negotiations. Sometimes I have sat outside, and many years ago I did used to negotiate. So I'm going to be drawing a little bit on kind of, a range of different experiences. I suppose I would say, if you're talking about pure negotiation, being very clear first of all at the outset what it is that you're after. You don't go into. I would say you wouldn't go into a negotiating meeting without having worked out in advance what position it is that you're pushing, you're negotiating for. It may not be a fully blown pay deal. It might be something to do with the rates of pay for shift workers or something like that. So going into a meeting with a very clearly defined idea of what you're after. And also, I think, who's on your negotiating team with you? Obviously, you would never go into a meeting on your own. I mean, I'm sure that's a commonly understood principle. You would certainly go in with one or two other reps. Who would you choose to go in with you? Who would go in with you? Different people on a negotiating panel bring different things to the table, actually. Usually you would have agreed in advance who's going to be doing the negotiating. It can be obviously very disruptive if you've all got an agreed line you're going to take, and then somebody pipes up and says actually something quite different. But on the other hand, sometimes injecting that authenticity into a negotiating meeting from somebody who has got a bee in their bonnet about this particular issue can be really powerful. Ideally, what you want is the bee in the bonnet person to be on script as well, but in their own way. So first of all, being clear about what you want to say. I would say not saying anything in the course of the meeting that you don't intend to say. That again, maybe it sounds like I'm being a bit too buttoned up here, but it's far better to come away having explored the areas you choose to explore, unless of course you decide in the course of the meeting that there is an opening. Now, in my limited and rather ancient experience, the adjournment was always a great device. And management, it always rather surprised me actually when we would say sometimes it would be with an official present, but sometimes we learned from the official. We'd say, "Oh, we'd like an adjournment," and management would say, "Oh, yes, okay, I'll clear out tables," and off they'd troop. I can only assume that they're used to doing this at their own internal meetings, and it was sort of carried over. Because an adjournment is great because you can say, "Hang on a minute, it's half time. Ring the bell. Let's see, where are we? Regroup. Is there something to go for here?" So I think definitely being in control of your own message, having a good team with you, being willing to ask for an adjournment, and also knowing, I think, what are my limits of my negotiation here? Is there a point where I feel like I have to go back and consult members? Because the other factor in this is no negotiator negotiates just for themselves, not in a union context. They're always negotiating for members. And knowing what your members want, knowing what your members think, having them on board, having them on side, having done all the preparation work in advance that you can possibly do, I think because it gives you confidence in a meeting that if you know you've got members behind you. I used to have a union branch secretary, and he used to say, there's that moment when you're standing in the sea and the water's up to here, and a wave comes along and suddenly it lifts you. Your feet come off the bottom. He used to give, that was his analogy for how he knew things were going in the right direction as far as members go. And if you can take that enthusiasm into a negotiating meeting and that certainty, that's a hugely powerful thing. So I would say having a good team, and that also involves people being prepared to step forward and take on union roles. So it's about if you like, there's a hinterland, if you like, to your negotiating. You aren't negotiating, I'm sure all the people, who negotiate here understand all this better than I do anyway, but you're not negotiating, in a vacuum. You've got your feet on the ground outside. And so having other reps, so it may be, for example, that there may be reps in your membership or people in your membership who are willing to be a safety rep, or they're willing to be a union learning rep, or they're willing to be a green rep. Even if they don't have a time, or they don't have the inclination to be a shop steward, or they don't want to be, or there isn't a vacancy, or what have you. But thickening out your team, building the strongest team you can, is always going to stand you in good stead. I would say facility time is another important thing here. Because all this stuff doesn't happen on the back of a fact packet. It takes organisation, it takes discussion. You need to get your own side in order to decide what your priorities are. Apart from your mapping, apart from any consultations you may have held, which are all grist to the mill. You need to organise yourselves, and maybe that can be done outside working time, but it should be possible to be able to do some of that in working time, and that's where your facility time agreement. And that comes back to going back to the very beginning, Anna, when you were asking about what it means to be a union. The first thing unions do, in my experience, is negotiate a recognition agreement, and probably facility time will be in there somewhere, and that is, what time can I have out off my job to meet with other union reps or to meet with members and do the union stuff, which, by the way, the employer will benefit from. And so facility time is important. What else have I said? Understanding what can happen if things go wrong. There may be conciliation needed. You may even need to go to ACAS. These things do happen from time to time. But I suppose even before you get anywhere near that, opening up a channel with your full-time union representatives, your full-time union officers as well. I'm quite sure, again, your officers and your workplace reps are on the same page anyway. But that's obviously, again, equally something that would need to be done in advance. And then don't forget your reporting back and consulting members at every stage about what's going on. Those are my suggestions, Anna.
They're excellent suggestions, Lewis. Really helpful, and I think really practical, that people can hopefully take some or all of and put into practice in the workplace. You've also listed everything that we include in our bargaining and negotiating sort of little subset of training we have, and I will include in the resources list that we send out to you all, which will come tomorrow, links to this, to our bargaining training, really. And it's not just about pay, it can be applied to any situation. Also some information on mapping and on building the union team. So all areas that Lewis mentioned as being part of your prep work, really, before you get in the room to negotiate. Okay, I think we've, even though I've not put any direct questions to you yet from the audience, we've covered a lot of the information that they've been asking about already, but there's one or two that I just want to add before we finish. So we've had a question that talks about inflation. Now, I know this can be quite technical, so I know we probably don't have time for lots of detail. So we know that the rate of inflation is cumulative, and over a year, this is very often higher. It's not just a figure that is on the day of the pay claim goes in. So the viewer has asked, should we be factoring in the fact that it's cumulative, and how could we communicate this to an employer? What sort of examples can we give around that, please?
Okay, I think it's a really good question, and there is, as you say, there's a lot to be said about inflation. In terms of a cumulative figure, I'm very keen. I think language is important here, and I write about the inflation figures all the time in labour research publications. And I'm always trying to resist to say inflation has fallen, inflation has dropped, because unless you've got 0% inflation, nothing's dropped or fallen. It's always going up. I mean, there are odd occasions. Back in 2008, I think, when the RPI went negative. But basically, you're looking at an escalator, really. And I think it's particularly in a period like this, it's very important that we don't lose sight of that. And this is going to be a challenge for everyone in the trade union movement, and in fact, all workers this year, because we have inflation rates are coming down. There's going to be a cut there's expected to be a cut in the energy price cap coming up. And there are, and the forecasts are, because the forecasts are so tricky with inflation. People have, even the Office of Budget Responsibility seems to have the ability of getting these kind of things wrong. So forecasting inflation is a devil's job in its own right. But just in a direct answer to your question, the inflation figures, whether you're using the Retail Prices Index or the Consumer Prices Index or the Consumer Prices Index with a housing element, CPIH, they all take the form of an index. It's a number. So they say, okay, on the 1st of January 2005, this basket of goods was equivalent to 100 on the index. And then every time they go out and recheck the value of a basket of goods every month or whatever it might be, they always reference back to that starting point. Now, why is that important? Because it means that it's actually comparatively easy to calculate inflation over more than 12 months. All we ever hear is, oh, the 12-month inflation rate. And then something that happened 13 months ago, like a big boost in the oil prices that drove prices through the roof, it's as if it's disappeared down the river. You know, everyone's, that's inflation has come down. And so, you know, I know it hasn't come down. It's just not going up as fast. So it is a very good, and we publish in Labour Research magazine. I'm looking around for a copy of it. Yeah, okay. I'm going to flash this up on screen. Sorry about this, guys. This is a proofing with all my proofing marks on it. But this is these are the index numbers here. Get it right. These are the index numbers for the Retail Prices Index, and they go back on this table. They go back over more than 12 months. It's not hugely difficult to say, okay, what was the index number at the date you want to start with, and what's the latest index number, and calculate the change as a percentage. Now, I'm not going to attempt to explain that here, but I'm sure you've got an app on your phone that will do that for you anyway. So that's the great thing about inflation figures. You can go back as far as you like. I mean, ideally not more than, I suppose, a few years, because then you think you get into, there are sometimes methodological changes. But you can go back and you can calculate inflation. And I think it's a really good thing to do. I would recommend actually anybody who feels like messing about with these figures, go and get the index numbers for March 2020 before we hit the lockdown, and calculate them against any period, any more recent period. Calculate them against the latest figures. So I can tell you the latest index number, for example, if inflation RPI is 378.0. Now that means nothing on its own, but compare it with earlier numbers, and it is cumulative. You can calculate it, and it's very powerful actually. Especially, and this is again where trade unions come in. Apart from anything else, we regulate the time, or we try to regulate the frequency of pay deals. And it may be your employer is saying, okay, well, we'd like to move the negotiating. This happens quite often, by the way. We'd like to move the negotiating date on. Or in fact, last year, we'd like to bring the negotiations early because we actually realize you're struggling. That was a surprise. But basically, we 18. Okay, so you're saying you want our next pay deal to be 18 months forward, or it's 18 months since we had our last pay deal. So your annual rate of inflation isn't doing it for you. Go back to the numbers, and again, if you want any help with this, do contact us. It's comparatively straightforward to get not so straightforward to find the index numbers on the ONS website. It should be easy. It's not too difficult, but get the index numbers and try playing around with them and seeing. It's always get the calculator out. What happens if I do that? And get someone else to check it for you in case you're not sure. Definitely, cumulative inflation is really important at the moment, because we're going to be told, look, inflation's dropped. I've achieved my target, and and so you can all stand down. And
yeah, excellent point there. I think we've just got time for one more question, which is, I think, quite a key one. Is about timings here. So someone's asked, when should negotiation talks start? They're saying, is March right? Is that too late, too early? I think they're assuming there that it would change with the April, the start of the financial year. But I think that also depends on your workplace and when it's just, when it's been decided by a prior negotiation about that pay rise. But I think the key question is, how long before that date should negotiations start? Because someone else said they can drag on and on and on throughout the year, and the pay isn't actually agreed.
Yes, that all those things can be true. I mean, I would say, if you are, in a standalone company or organization, say a charity or something of that nature, and there's nobody else involved in the negotiating chain, it's just you and the employers, then I suppose, I would certainly say even then, I would definitely be thinking a couple of months, maybe 3 months, maybe ahead. I wouldn't leave it. I wouldn't leave it much longer than that before you've got an agreed date in mind. That's the other thing. You've got a negotiation date. And by the way, if anyone does want to have a log on to Payline, one of the things that you can see if you click onto any of the individual agreements that we show details for, you can see a history. You can see a history not only of what they got, but also when they got it. So I would say, certainly allow a couple of months. I mean, if there's other people in the chain, for example, your employer may actually have to refer back up to head office. They're quite possibly operating under some sort of constraints. Things can take ages if you've got a national negotiation taking place. And I've had personal experience of this. It can be frustrating waiting for the deal to come through before you can put your icing on the cake, so to speak. I would certainly be thinking months. And I know in the finance industry, of course, you're dealing with big organizations, and of course, they've got to go and get their benchmarking data and so on. I think they typically would start negotiating in, say, September for a pay deal that's due January, February, March. If there's anyone here from the finance sector, please feel free to email me and correct me. But my experience with them, there's quite a long run into the negotiations. And if it's, as you say, if you're up against, for example, a government not wanting to accept the legitimate demands, you can easily run into a year plus. But when you start the negotiations, sometimes you're starting negotiations almost before you've concluded the previous year's deal. People are familiar with this, I'm sure. I would say don't sell yourself short. Better to be prepared too soon and to have to maybe fine-tune your claim as new data becomes available, than to be leaving it too late and have members. Where are your members? How are your members going to get involved? So I think about all the elements. Who's involved, all the different parties involved in your negotiation, and all the elements involved, and sort of, almost map that, if you like, and then make sure that you're getting started in good time to address all of those things.
Excellent advice there. Earlier the better, really, rather than a mad scramble at the 11th hour. So I think we've been talking for over an hour now, and it's been incredibly useful and insightful. And actually, I think this is probably something we might come back to later in the year in our webinar schedule, because there's lots that I don't think we've covered yet. So I think we've had some really insightful questions from the audience and really good advice exchange in the chat panel. So thank you to everybody for joining us, and thank you to Lewis. One final thing from me: it is Heart Unions Week, as I said, and you may have seen me with my Heart Unions livery. You can order all of this from the TUC shop, so do have a look at that if you want to get pens, mugs, stickers, etc. Please do have a good rest of the day and rest of the week, and we will see you again soon for another webinar from the TUC. Bye bye for now.